earth is my home. I promise to keep it healthy and beautiful. I will love the land, the air, the water, and all living creatures. I will be a defender of my planet, united with...
My name is Commissioner Frank Avila, and this is Commissioner Frank Avila Speaks. And the name of our show today is Ecology and Culture of Water. And today, as my guest, I have Gerould Wilhelm. Gerould is a principal botanist and ecologist with Conservation Design Forum. And my other guest is James Patchett. He's the founder and president of Conservation Design Forum. Jim, what is Conservation Design Forum?
We are a multidisciplinary planning and design firm whose focus is in sustainable development, sustainable design and development, and all of our work revolves around integrating water as a resource and becomes kind of the guiding factor in our design and thinking process from the beginning through implementation and long-term management.
You know, I hear that word sustainable. Everyone is using that word. What does that mean, sustainable?
Jerry, you want to answer
Jerry,
that?
Well, it means that all that which you do is such that generations yet unborn will not be anything other than helped or their happiness in life enhanced by what you do.
And we could continue using
Yes.
that product or whatever we do is sustained for ourselves, our kids, their kids. It's not wasting what we're using.
Anything that we would do that would take away from their a right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness would not be a very American thing to do.
Yeah, you know, Jerry, I mentioned you're a principal botanist and ecologist. Could you explain to the audience what is a botanist and ecologist?
Well, of course, our culture tends to organize people into component disciplines, and the discipline of botany, of which a botanist is a part, is one who studies plants.
Yes.
And that can be studying the plant taxonomy or plant physiology or plant geography. And an ecologist comes from the Greek word for house, oikos, and ology, the study of or the knowledge of. And so an ecologist studies and becomes aware of all of what is going on in the great house within which we all live.
And this is the planet.
This is the planet.
Yeah, this is right, and we have to make sure that we preserve it for future to come.
It's the only planet we've got.
Oh yes, yes. Now you know we're gonna the name of our show is Ecology and Culture of Water. That's the name of our show, and you know we had this recent flooding here in the Chicagoland area, and they said that it was one of the worst floods in history. Maybe in my time, maybe 300 years ago, 400, 500, we had more. But we had about 6, 7, 8 inches here in the Chicagoland area. And why do you think these events are increasing in frequency and intensity?
Well, because historically, for the thousands of years prior to European settlement, nearly all the rain that fell on the Chicago area and the Midwest went in the ground and flowed beneath the surface in a slow but metered rate to our rivers. This is why our rivers had nothing but cool, clean water at a constant rate of discharge, full of fish and full of mussels and full of life, and never ran dry and rarely flooded. With our agriculture, where we have tilled out the topsoil by the increase in impervious surface from our rooftops and our roads and our parking lots, water, being an uncompressible resource, is right now more than ever before, since the last ice age, falling on our ground and moving as fast as it can downslope to our rivers, causing immense floods. And the downside of that, too, is not only all the flood damage it causes, but it doesn't go back into the ground and feed our streams. So our rivers tend to be dry and low and hot and lifeless when it's not raining, and large and roiling and full of dangerous floodwater when it rains. So part of what Conservation Design Forum does, or tries to do, is work with every surface upon which rain falls, and tries to help the people who are custodians of that surface hold that rain as a resource, not generate it as a waste product.
Yeah, we're living here in Cook County.
Yeah.
And as you mentioned, it used to be farmland.
Yeah.
And when it rains, that soil used to soak up the water, and as you mentioned, it permeates down into the soil, and then it'll flow to the streams, or maybe it goes down into the aquifer. And then it evaporates back up and comes back. You know, the water cycle. This same water we've been using for 4,000 years.
Yes.
And but Cook County is all built up. We got roads, streets, pavements, parking lots. So when the water hits it, it goes to a catch basin. Right. It goes into a storm sewer, or maybe a combined storm sewer, and that's it. And Sherry, could you bring up slide number 1? And this is what happened in Iowa City, probably, on this big rain, or did the river overflow and flood the town?
Interesting. In Iowa, what you have, and these are largely in Iowa and parts of south and south central Wisconsin that had very serious flooding this spring. You have watersheds that are largely agricultural. They had record snowfalls last year, and the one time of year historically when water would flow over the surface of the ground and accumulate in low-lying places like wetlands and streams and lakes and rivers was in spring snowmelt. So they had a lot of snow. That snow melted in the spring, flowed across the surface, and ends up in the rivers, making them bank full, which is the sort of thing that would have happened to a certain degree historically. Unfortunately, what has changed since then is that in most of our Midwestern agricultural soils, the heritage, as Jerry had mentioned, of prairie, no longer do you have 15 to 20,000 kilograms of root mass per hectare, or that equates to somewhere around, say, 12 to 16 or 18,000 pounds of root mass per acre. You have very little to no root mass. The soils, you've lost most of your topsoil, so you've lost almost all of your organic content that you had, and that's all been eroded away through repeated tillage over the years, wind and water erosion, and now you have essentially, from a hydrologic perspective, land that from the winter snow melt, the soils remain saturated, and you have an unusual amount of rainfall in the spring. Well, the rivers are already bank full from the spring snow melt.
And the soil can't accept any more water.
Can't accept any more water. Historically, the amount of rainfall that occurred over most of north, central, and northeast Iowa really was somewhere between about 15 to 21 inches of rainfall from May 20th to June 20th, a 4-week period. And that water couldn't really go into the ground.
Now, can we bring up, Sherry, bring up slide 4, and this will explain the root diagram, Sherry?
Yep.
Can we bring up 4? And so is this what you're talking about, the root?
Yeah, I mean, in a historical tallgrass prairie ecosystem, you have a massive root system.
Yes.
And it's carbon, through the process of photosynthesis and carbon cycling, you're absorbing net amounts you're removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere in photosynthesis, and you're absorbing, because 70 to 90% of your plant mass exists below ground in this massive root architecture, you're trapping a portion of that carbon every year, and it begins to build up. When a third of that root system on average dies up, it begins to build up in very rich, highly organic soil. And so you have this net accumulation every year of sequestered soil organic carbon, and that's how the prairies became, evolved through that annual carbon cycling into the richest soils in the world. Very capable of absorbing water, and there's been enough research, including some research that we were involved in a number of years ago.
And this is helping climate change before.
Well, absolutely.
Right? Regarding the CO2. But nowadays, it's not doing it.
Well, and a very important part of the hydrologic cycle for all living things was the ability of water to condense back into that system and work its way down into the root system on a daily basis and then evaporate and transpire back into the atmosphere again to provide a constant cycling of water.
And taking in that CO2.
And taking in that CO2 and removing more CO2 on an annual basis than it gave back.
Yes.
And well, now that's all gone. The soils are no longer organic soils laced with this massive root system and covered with this grass and flower complex, but rather it's a highly mineral soil with very little organic matter, becomes saturated very quickly, and from that point on, as those spring rainfalls moved into the summer, those soils were incapable of absorbing any water. And when you look at, say, 15 to 21 inches over a watershed the size of the Iowa River watershed or the Cedar River watershed or other watersheds here in the upper Midwest, and all of that water quickly running across the surface of the ground and getting down into those river systems, you only have to do the math to realize how overwhelming, just like it was here in the Chicagoland area, how overwhelming 6 or 7 inches of water over a geographic context, all very quickly being discharged into a river system, how overwhelming that is.
Well, that's why here in Chicago in Albany Park, where the North Branch Chicago River overflowed, and all that area got flooded. I mean, people had to evacuate where they're living on the first floor or in the basement. And this is where groups now, this Clean Water America Alliance, is trying to change the Clean Water Act to amend it. We want to amend it to include a watershed approach. And which is very important now that we have to consider a watershed approach. And Sherry, could you bring up slide 2? And this slide 2, it shows a conventional infrastructure. And this is one of your images here. Who could explain this one? Jim, it was this is water. It's showing on the conventional infrastructure here.
Well, as a conventionally trained engineer or planner, the doctrine in which we're trained and have practiced for centuries now in North America is one of collection, conveyance, and discharge.
Yes.
Water falls on a site. It is quickly sent into a small hole in the ground. That may be a catch basin, which then is piped into a discharge point. That discharge point may be a temporary detention basin. But the point is that all of our energy and creativity is placed in a focus of collection, conveyance, and discharge, rather than one where we accept the rainfall, learn how to design cities and neighborhoods and
this is where your slide 3 comes into.
Exactly.
So this slider shows how we're collecting the water and we're not using it the way we should use it. And so now what you develop now is your next slide 3, and this is how you would use this water now instead of collecting into a storm sewer or a reservoir and discharging that into some stream.
Yeah, but see, what happened in the Water Pollution Control Act of 1972, which became known as the Clean Water Act, we had been fed up with all the water problems we had been causing, and it was a great law that was passed, and they actually anticipated or projected that by 1983, the waters of the United States would be fishable and swimmable.
Yes.
But because ever since Jefferson, and for reasons we could explain if you want, but we had been in the doctrine of collect, convey, and discharge the water, in 1972 we began collecting and conveying it and discharging it less badly, but it's still in the doctrine of collect, convey, and discharge. If we get a new Clean Water Act, we need to change the doctrine to receive the water as a resource and not generate it as a waste product, so that every drop of water falls is considered a resource. If we don't change the doctrine, then we'll just make things less bad. So this is all genius, all brilliant thought, all great imagination since Jefferson. All brilliant engineers have applied their craft in the doctrine of collect, convey, and discharge. It's not because we've been stupid. It's not because we've been dumb. It's because we have been guided by the wrong doctrine. And so we take all the genius, all the brilliance in our engineers, and we apply them in the doctrine to receive all the rain as a blessing and as a resource, then we'll get out of this mess. But we could write another 1,000 laws, and we don't change the doctrine, we will not do well.
And this is why in slide 3, Sherry, could you bring this up again? And that's why in slide 3 you change from a conventional development to a sustainable development.
Right.
And so in a sustainable development, what do you have there?
Well, you see the one on the it will be the one that's called conventional.
Yes.
You have the same sort of strip mall program that goes up all the places.
Pavements, water drops out, hits the pavement in the catch basin.
Well, and it goes to the detention basin.
Right.
But it is all turned to filth and goes to the detention basin and is detained for a little while, but all the dirty water goes away. Well, that was a resource.
Yeah.
Now we're having to mine water out of the ground to get the same water that rained on us that was once a gift. What we do in the sustainable one is all the rain that falls on a roof, on a parking lot, wherever it falls is received in such a manner as to produce healthy plants, healthy landscapes, beautiful landscapes, all places where water will go in and not come off and cause a problem. And any water that does leave is metered out just like it used to be in the days before settlement, before our doctrine, when the water would weep to the rivers and seep to the rivers through our rivers, and the rivers could then abound with fish and all the things.
And also your sustainable development, you're also helping collect the CO2s because you have plants. Right, the water will move maybe through your soil and remove some of the pollutants. If you have a little wetlands in there.
It depends on what the pollutant is, but if a pollutant is one that can't be metabolized, then it'll always be there. And if it isn't metabolized by the system, it'll hang there and accumulate. So what you want to do is not generate any pollutants. Okay. So what we do with a lot of our designs is try not to generate any pollutant to begin with. And therefore, but certain kinds of pollutants, like certain kinds of organics, can be they'll either volatilize or they can be denatured by microorganisms in the soil if they hang there long enough. Heavy metals, if the soil pH is fairly alkaline or has a high pH, the heavy metals can hang there.
Yes. And
so we really have to be careful. Wetlands are not the place to fix to clean water. The best way to do it is not make the water dirty.
Okay.
And another important piece of this is to restore, even in very urban contexts, in fact, very important in urban contexts, because we can use this as an important design tool, is to restore the ability for evaporation and transpiration to once again occur.
Using the water cycle.
Yes, absolutely.
And keep that water cycle going for the next 5,000, 10,000 years, because that's all we have.
At least for 7 generations.
Yes. I mean, we cannot make more water.
Right.
So we have to, for us to live and for us to enjoy ourselves, go to a movie, we need water to drink.
Well, we're fortunate right here because we're drawing off of 25% of the world's fresh drinking water in the Great Lakes system, but that's not inexhaustible either. For those communities who are just a few miles west of here or south of here, on the other side of the mid-continental divide, their water sources are groundwater reserves, and you cannot continue to send 2/3 or 3/4 of your annual precipitation plus eliminate the ability for daily water cycling through condensation, evaporation, and transpiration. You can't send all of that water away, continue to draw more out of your water reserves and not replenish that water reserve.
You're not putting it back in.
And think that you're going to have an inexhaustible water supply forever and ever more. And that's already becoming a very serious problem in communities throughout this region that are running out of fresh water supplies.
We won't let people build in 100-year floodplains, but we'll let people get 30-year mortgages in aquifers without 30 years of water.
Yes.
And so the economic impact of not addressing this issue will one day make the current economic impact look like Kinderspiel.
Well, I foresee that maybe in 10 years we're going to have a migration of people moving up here around the Great Lakes because of water. You know, maybe a whole town might be have shortage of water and no water, and they have to come up here and live someplace where they have drinking water.
There will be great dislocations.
Yeah, oh yes. As we saw 2,000 years ago where people migrated, left. It used to be a fertile area, and they didn't have water to grow their plants, and they had to move someplace else so they could survive.
Well, a human being can live without a lot of things,
but not water.
You can't live without water.
Right, not water. Yeah,
and good food.
And good food. Yes, we need those two things: food and water. That's true. Now, we have stormwater codes, we have ordinance, and as you were mentioning, they don't work. And so how to change those codes and ordinance, especially here in the Midwest and in the Cook County area?
You must change the doctrine. We can have all the ordinances in the world that are in the doctrine of collect, convey, and discharge less badly, and we'll always have a problem. We have to change the doctrine within which all things are thought. Receive the water as a blessing. So all of us think about this thing. This is the hardest thing for our people to do.
Well, to change, that's a educational process. And so we're all up in age now, and we'll probably live another 20 years, 15 years. But so how do we educate our kids, and how do we educate our parents so they could see, look, this is what we have to do? Because it's not going to be a 20-year cycle that we're going to change the way we think here in the codes and how to take care of water. So we have to educate. How do we do that?
Well, we have to teach our babies, teach our children the way of water, and the earth is born again with each new child, and so is our hope. Yeah. And since we are old, we know our babies have grown. It doesn't take very long. And in 20 years, there can be a world revolution where we do a lot of things, where we treat each other, where we grow food, where we handle our water.
Well, I see it coming. I see it coming. And that's why
happen very quickly.
We're here at this moment while we're taping. We're going to start the Water and Farming Federation Conference. And at that conference on Monday, October the 20th, we're going to invite 100 science teachers to come to the conference. And we're going to 50 from the high schools and 50 from the grammar schools. And we have engineers are going to teach the teachers how to teach the kids about water environment. And probably through this educational process that may grow to teach the kids how to take care of the water environment.
But it must be in that doctrine of receive it as a blessing.
Right.
It cannot be in the doctrine of let's find a way to get rid of it less badly.
Now, a question here is that, can you explain the hydrological context of historical ecosystem in this part of the country?
Well, that's one easy way to do it.
Or then an hour talk or 2 hours explanation.
Well, the Illinois River, many people can look at a map and see the Illinois River, which is a fairly large river.
Yes.
It actually drained 40% of the state of Illinois and part of Wisconsin. And yet, at Alton, at the time of settlement, with the mouth of the river, it had rarely flooded. And an early study indicated that the discharge of the Illinois River that received all that rain was negligible.
Yes.
And this is because all the rain that fell in Illinois went into the ground and seeped to the rivers as a cool discharge. This began to change. Amos Sawyer published a paper in the Transactions of the St. Louis Philosophical Society in 1874 in which he asked the question, in which he tried to answer the question, the reasons for climate change in Illinois. And he concluded that the reasons that the climate had changed. It used to be a thunder shower most every afternoon to come by on a timely way.
Because was that because of the water cycle?
Water always coming up.
Okay.
And he said, but then of course we became a state in 1818,
yeah.
And we began farming in big time already after 1835,
okay.
And the steel plow. And so in a few short years, we had transformed the land to dewater by ditching it. And the ditching of the land to commoditize agriculture the way we had, no longer family farms, but to commoditize it. No longer farms that just fed towns, but tried to make great, almost commodity-type agriculture.
And then was it a single crop that were growing to also not, because at that time they must have been growing 8 different types of crops.
Well, even at that time, there's so many different kinds
yes.
and animals. So it was becoming with the advent of trains and ships and the steel plow and new markets, sure. It quickly drove people to commodity agriculture, yeah. And it drove people to try to optimize or maximize the ability to farm land, even wetland. And so Illinois was drained, and with the ditches, and Sawyer described these things. Huh?
And the tiles.
And the tile system later. But he indicated that already the climate was changing due to this, what he called the aqueous agent, and our mismanagement of it.
And you know, when we treat wastewater, here, I'm one of the commissioners at the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District of Greater Chicago. When we treat wastewater, it's a collection system. You know, we have two types of collection system here in Cook County. We have the combined sewers, where we combine the stormwater and the wastewater, and other communities, they just have a separate storm and waste. But when we treat it, we discharge that into our channels. It goes into the Illinois River, from Des Plaines River. Then it goes into the Illinois River. From the Illinois River, it goes into Mississippi down to the Gulf of Mexico. So what we do environmentally does have an effect, traveling all the ways down, and all that runoff as you move through the Des Plaines River, Illinois River, Mississippi, all that is polluting the water.
You want to hear a story?
Of the runoff of the fertilizer they're using, the pesticides, herbicides, or whatever they're using on that farmland runs off into our waterways there.
You know, in 1899, you know, we turned the Chicago River the other direction, downstream. And of course the water intakes for Chicago were having to be further out into the lake, because we wanted our drinking water from the lake, but our pollution was also going in the lake. And so the engineers came up with the idea that why don't we reverse it and send it to Peoria. I guess Peoria's army wasn't big enough to come. But anyway, this was, as long as it was 50,000 gallons per minute or so going through, the engineers imagined that this would be okay and diluted enough. And
that was a way to treat by dilution.
At that time, but what they didn't calculate or anticipate was that the lake level would go down. And when the lake level went down and the population went up, the pollution of the 20s killed all life in the Illinois River, from Chicago to Alton. Two living things in the entire river: sewage fungus and sludge worms. That was it. We lost 100 species of fish, 49 unionid clams, plus the fingernail clam. The entire mussel fishing industry of the central part of the river just collapsed. No more fish, and it's been slow to recover. And of course the locks and dams went in the 40s, and that prevented a lot of fish from moving back upstream. The river's had quite an odyssey in our relationship with it. But we've really got to start asking ourselves, what will be the consequences for our behavior? Our short-term expedience is the way to handle our issues.
And the problem we're having right now is this carp, Asian carp. That's moving up. It's maybe 40 miles right outside of Lake Michigan, right outside our locks, and they're devouring everything that they could find to eat. And so if that ever gets into Lake Michigan, you explain what happened at that time. That's going to change the aquatic life in Lake Michigan, and maybe in the Great Lakes. Because we have this invasion species coming in. There. And so we are in a little problem, and that's why we have to change the way we do things here to improve our water. And that's why the name of our show is Ecology and Culture of Water, because we have to do something now. So you propose a complete different approach to water resource management. And this is what your firm. How long has your firm been in business?
A little over 14 years now.
A little 14 years. And the reason why you started your company, I know you want to make a little profit, but it looks like you care about the environment, and you care how to make society a better place for us to live in.
We have children, and I have grandchildren.
Oh, yes.
I actually met Jerry nearly 20 years ago, and my background's in landscape architecture and hydrological engineering. I was working in ecological restoration projects at the time, and wasn't having a lot of success in terms of trying to recreate fairly diverse habitats. In fact, what we would find was within the first couple of years after we had tried to recreate wetland habitats is that almost all of the biodiversity that we had introduced into these systems either never germinated and established, or if we planted them by live plant plugs, a few species would grow, and then within a couple of years the systems would be completely dominated by cattails, reed canary grass, phragmites, and purple loosestrife, what we refer to as the usual suspects.
Yes.
And I met Jerry and actually had a lunch with him, and then we went out to Bluff Springs Fen near shortly thereafter, which is a wonderful Illinois nature preserve, state nature preserve near Elgin. And that's when I had my professional epiphany, if you will, because I had been trained in the doctrine of collection, conveyance, and discharge. In fact, the primary functions and values of wetlands still to this day, if you look in every piece of literature that talks about the preservation and protection of wetlands, is that wetlands are important for floodwater storage and water cleansing, so they act like the big kidney to clean up all the pollutants that we dump on top of them. And when I described that I was frustrated in that none of these more conservative native species could grow in any of these habitats, and I wondered why, because we had planted them there and expected them, they were native to this region, and Jerry actually explained to me the law, and that I was breaking the law, and I said, I wasn't breaking the law, and he said, well, you were breaking the botanical law, and that's plants grow in habitats to which they're adapted. And if you change the habitat, you'll change the inhabitants. And so we went out to Bluff Springs Fen, and there's this, it's just a wonderful example of historical hydrology in Illinois being fed, the system is fed and sustained by seeps and springs and groundwater hydrology and discharge. So our wetlands and aquatic systems were formed by discharge, not by water running out of the top and recharging them. And it all came together for me when he shared that there are about 1,000 native plants to this general geographic area, and about half of them are what today would be referred to as a wetland or a hydric plant. And out of those 500 wetland plants, once I understood the context of groundwater-dominated hydrology, and that our wetland and aquatic systems were formed and sustained by predominantly groundwater discharge, didn't flood during the growing season because the whole of the watershed would absorb the water, as fast as it fell out of the sky. You didn't have this kind of erratic system to which all of our stream corridors and wetlands are subject to today. You didn't have stormwater being dumped on top of them.
We have concrete, roads, paving, and we have everything's covered.
Absolutely.
With lawns, yeah.
Absolutely. And so he asked me, in my opinion, once I understood the context of historical hydrology and the relationships between historical terrestrial and aquatic ecosystems as it relates to hydrology, how many of those 500 native wetland plants, in my opinion, had a long-term ancient genetic history of growing in habitats constantly influenced by inundation from dirty, polluted surface water runoff every single time it rains.
And surface water, because everyone poops. We go to the washroom, a human being, and we have a collection system to catch our poop. But animals, birds, they hit that pavement. The storm water comes in, runoff, and collecting all that bacteria.
Picks up the herbicide,
oil,
the
herbicides,
oils, greases, salt.
Every spring we have a lawn. We buy the commercial fertilizer, herbicides, pesticides, anything that will kill the weed. And then next year we do it again and again and again, and it's not killing the weeds.
And all of that that's undissolved or non-absorbed by that plant ends up getting into the surface water and our groundwater systems, and it gets dumped on top of these places. And basically, the long and the short of that story is we have no plants that have any genetic history of growing in that kind of habitat, so almost all of our flora defaults, dies, and the only places that are the refuges for these very conservative plants are the few places like Bluff Springs Fen that still have that ancient historical relationship of hydrology still in place. And then it dawned on me that day, as we were talking about it, that the only reason that our wetland and aquatic places, like our wetlands and streams and lakes and rivers, end up being the repository for our waste is because the water that fell within that watershed ended up being dumped in there because of our relationship with it. And the worst part of all of that is we're trained to do it.
Yeah, and we have very few wetlands too.
Not wetlands, the kind of wetlands that we had.
Well, I was trained as a civil engineer.
Right.
And I was trained to design sewers, pipes, size of pipe, detention ponds, to when it rains, we'll try to control it. See, we want to control water, and we're not doing a good job of controlling. And I'm glad you brought it up. We have two types of law. We have man-made law, ordinance, regulations, and I'm glad that Jerry brought up law of botany, because we're not following that law too good.
It's a pilot. A pilot cannot stretch a glide.
Yeah.
A pilot, if he drops below the stall speed, will die. Even if he's a good person, that means well, has all good intentions, and votes the right way, he still die.
Yeah.
Because he broke a natural law.
Right.
We have to understand that there really are natural laws, and
we have to consider that.
We have to consider and then learn to work lovingly within it.
And pass laws to implement that nature law.
Right. Which is why we wrote the paper when we wrote it 12 years ago called The Ecology and Culture of Water.
I was reading it. You know, audience, if you want to read a good paper, Jim and Jerry wrote a paper it's called Ecology and Culture of Water, and this is why we named the show Ecology. It's an excellent paper to read for educating, and maybe they should incorporate that reading. Maybe not in grammar school. We have to bring it down in grammar school, but starting in high school.
Well, we're actually preparing a kind of a later elementary to middle school book right now that tells this story at a level that students that age can completely grasp.
Yes.
And it'll be an introduction to science, and a lot of these issues will be described in a very holistic manner.
Yes.
It's called A Turtle's Tale.
A Turtle's Tale, yeah. And I think so. And if they want to get your report or your book on the ecology and culture of water, they could contact our show, and then I'll give them your name. Now, is there a charge for this book, or no? It's
no,
free.
You can download it off of our webpage.
Okay, so I'll give the audience out there, if you want a copy of their, is it a book or report?
It's just a white paper, but we're hoping to actually turn that into a book as well.
I started reading that. Excellent. It's the Ecology and Culture of Water, and this is a law, not a man-made law. It's a botany law, you say, or just
it's a natural law.
Natural law.
And it's something you can be afraid of.
Yes.
It's because we have seen wherever we have dealt with water in a holistic, wholesome way, it makes all infrastructure and places where people work, live, play, and pray beautiful and lovely.
Yes.
So being attentive to these natural laws, just like in the Bible, you know, if you're attentive to these laws, the land will flow with milk and honey.
Yes.
If you're not attentive to these laws, the clouds will shut up and it won't rain on you anymore.
Yes.
Of course, it may come out of the sky, but it won't go into the ground. It'll go right away.
Right.
And the point being, as you were, alluding to, is that we have to develop our own relationship with the Earth's resources and develop our cultural laws in a way that support our physical laws, so that they're actually working, simpatico with each other instead of in conflict.
That's true, because
right now.
Right now we have this financial crisis. Right now in the marketplace, the banks, and we're very concerned on the survival of our economy. And we're spending a lot of money, but the big problem that we have to be concerned, and this is where our next president has to be more concerned, not on this financial market, not on spending all this money on upgrading our banks and our stock, but to provide a financial or a plan to solve the ecology and culture of water and spend our resources there, because if we don't solve this problem, we won't be around to solve the financial problems that we're facing now. This is the biggest thing that we have to do.
If you think about it, that farmer that stood at Fort Dearborn in 1832, Black Hawk was still angry, there was no government to administer it, the steel plow had not been invented, there was no market. How could he have imagined it would be farmed from there to Denver in his lifetime? But it was, by one farmer and one farmer and one farmer. And by degrees, as we change our doctrine, we can, in a very short period of time, think about it. Everything we do has been in the wrong doctrine. If we shift the doctrine, when we develop our new economy, think of the jobs, the growth, the capital form, the prosperity, as we redesign and rebuild everything intelligently and in simpatico with natural laws. It's really a huge opportunity if we take it.
If we take it, because all these years we have destroyed our soil, as you were mentioning in that one diagram, where when it rains, that soil isn't absorbing the water, and that's why we're not charging up our streams. and that's why our aquatic life is dying. And then and this is why you started your company, to implement what everyone is saying, how to solve the climate change and global warming. You know, we're all saying these things and reading that there's a problem, but no one is implementing it. And this is what you're doing. You're implementing what you're preaching.
I never wanted to spend, from that day forward, I never wanted to spend another professional day of my life trying to deploy whatever imagination and skills that I have and my colleagues have in the collection, conveyance, and discharge. I wanted to at least attempt as best we could, and it's an iterative learning process, trying to develop another way of thinking. And interestingly enough, it's not that difficult. It's very cost effective, and this can be done anywhere that we live, work, and play, whether it's in the middle of downtown Chicago, in a suburban community, or if it's out in rural agriculture. We can not just stop the negative impacts, but we can design whole new systems of urban, suburban, and agricultural land uses that are restorative to these processes.
And this is some of your basic water management, green infrastructure that measures that you would promote. Okay, let's talk about downtown Chicago. Okay, you know, we're not going to take down these buildings and rip up the roads. I mean they're here, but we could do something to improve this area here.
Oh, you bet. Every time we redo a roof, you know about City Hall, what the mayor's done with City Hall.
Yeah.
That is an amazing. That has had an amazing impact on the city of Chicago.
And that's slide 5, Sherry. That's right there on the screen right now.
Yeah, that was done for a number of reasons, but it has really stimulated a lot of green roof activity since then. Imagine 30% of the city of Chicago is rooftop.
Yeah, and if they all have that rain guard.
They have the rain garden.
They'll absorb the water rain. The water will absorb in this rain guard.
In the roof, there's a lot of other advantages of having your green roof. We won't go into that now. But the rain, whenever they tear up the street, they can also make rain gardens in the street and the sidewalks. They can make the streets in such a manner as to move water to porous parking bays or whatever. There's ways you can hold nearly all that rainwater or keep it so slow going to the lake that it will be inconsequential.
Here's another picture we're having is urban refit.
Yeah, it's really looking at every opportunity for every surface to be a receptacle for water rather than to generate a stormwater product being sent someplace else. So if you think about this, how can I design a building top? How can I design a street, a sidewalk, a parking lot? All of the surfaces to receive, recycle, capture, reuse, diffuse, cleanse, absorb,
and
evaporate, transpire, working with the historical context and mimicking those processes in very contemporary urban environments. It's all very doable, and in so doing, we believe that we can create very high quality environments that cost less to maintain over a period of time, but yet things like, if you have water constantly cycling up into your street system and your sidewalks, near your homes, on your rooftops, imagine how much cooler and pleasant a place that is to be than a hot roof or a hot street corridor.
To save on energy.
It all fits together.
CO2s. I mean, everything comes together then.
Yep. Yeah, and it's not that difficult to do. It's just applying our energies in a different focus.
If your air intakes are on your roof, imagine you're trying to take your HVAC system and convert 160-degree air to 75 degrees rather than 90-degree air.
Yes.
So like on Chicago's City Hall, that air intake is taking up much cooler air than over on the county side of the building.
And you're saving a lot of energy.
A lot of money.
You know, as a civil engineer, I was taught that when it rains and the water comes through, hits that clay, then it doesn't penetrate nothing. Probably so this was my training when I was going, and I graduated from one of the top schools down in Champaign, Illinois, at the University of Illinois.
Good school.
Yeah, excellent school. And so when they started coming up with that porous pavement system, where when it rains, the pavement will absorb that water and it has moved down, then hits that clay, and then that's it. See, what do you think about that, Jerry? Do you?
Well, we designed it. We don't put the porous pavers right over clay without the appropriate base in there to hold the rainwater.
Right.
You know, we have ways of holding, either detaining or retaining the water under there until it can move to the seep out and receive the next rain.
Yes.
That's really still an engineering and technical detail, but it's not a problem.
Yes, especially here, you know, in Chicago or in the Cook County area, we have a lot of limestone. We have clay, and then we have lime, and limestone maybe is up to the surface, maybe a foot below the surface, or some area 30, 40 feet below down there.
The interesting thing is we always had clay soils. We had limestone near the surface in many locations, but those places didn't generate runoff. The water still went into the ground. What we have to do is to deploy these suite of green infrastructure measures or others to allow for water to be absorbed at the surface and then let it start cycling. So porous pavement on top of an area that even has high clay soils, we're not trying to influence, we'll get some, but we're not trying to influence a lot of infiltration under that base layer. We want that to either evaporate or to dewater within a certain period of time, but when it does dewater, it does it slowly, cleanly, and coolly, and then we can design other elements in adjacent to it to pick up that water. We can reuse it.
Well, when you say cleanly, how will it clean the water as it comes through then?
Well,
will the soil remove some of the pollutants?
Actually, the granular layer is very effective at a number of different things. You'll get fines moving down through and get trapped, so that by the time the water percolates through your granular drainage layer,
like a filter.
It's like a filter. The greases and oils tend to get bound in that layer, and you'll get soil microbes that start to munch on them. It's like if you were
the good bugs eat the bad bugs.
Exactly, and you break that hydrocarbon chain. Yeah. And so, and then some of the heavy metals tend to adhere.
Jerry, your nature, the law of nature comes in.
Work with it rather than against it.
Yes, work with it.
So it's really the concept of diffuse and cleanse, absorb to the degree that you can, and then move and migrate and allow things to move laterally the way they would have historically on top of a clay lens, and then accommodated elsewhere as a suite of integrated measures, rather than as a, you know, one best management practice here and then something else there. And it's just a different way.
We were talking about downtown. Let's talk about an individual that has a home or a business. What can they do?
The first simplest thing that you can do if you have a lawn, if you want to, is just raise the mower as high as it'll go.
Yeah.
By increasing the photosynthetic area of that leaf, you will increase your root system and have less runoff.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, Jerry, because my wife is on me to cut that lawn all the time.
I tell her you got to let it grow.
I can't do that. Jerry says I got to keep it 4 or 5 inches. You hear that, folks? That keep it long.
There's more solar receptors there.
Yes.
And you can build more root systems.
I believe that.
That's one thing you can do, and then also you can make dig a slight depression in your yard to take your roof drain and make it go into perennial garden, and so all the rainwater that's coming there can just go right into the ground, and you water by degrees. You can even work it a little bit to your driveway. If you redo your driveway, you can arrange the water to slant a little bit off into the lawn, depending on how your yard is spaced.
Yes.
So a homeowner, over the course of time, can do an awful lot.
And eliminate the commercial fertilizer, the herbicides, the pesticides, because when they put it on their lawn, they'll walk on their lawn, they bring it in their house, and they'll have more herbicides, pesticides in their home than they have on their lawn.
You remember, if you have let's say you have a 1/4 acre lot, just to make life easy. Most people don't, but let's say you did.
Yeah.
That's in Chicago. You have custodianship over 250,000 gallons a year.
Yes.
That's how much water falls on your property.
Sure.
If you have an 1/8 acre lot, that's what, 175,000 gallons of water a year. And so, or 125,000 gallons a year. And so you have a lot of water that falls on your house. You have to ask yourself, as it rains on your house and watches that water be turned to polluted filth and sent to the gutter, what right do you have to send that water to a neighbor downstream?
Yes.
And when you begin to think about this, then you start looking for ways to hold that water as a resource, particularly if you've sent all your water away and now have to go out and mine water out of the ground, drinking water, to keep it to keep the grass alive enough to continue to turn more rain to filth.
Yeah.
And so it's really how you
Sure.
get back into a mode of receiving that rain.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, at the residential level, as Jerry's mentioning, one of the easiest, simplest, most cost-effective tools are to incorporate rain gardens. And instead of taking all of the water and putting it in one place where it overwhelms you, you diffuse the water out through a series. You can design them any way you like with whatever kinds of plants that you like. You can shape them architecturally, or you can make them organic. And then if you want to get, more involved, if you have an older home, most of them have cisterns. You rehook the cistern back up. You collect and reuse that water. Our ancestors knew how important it was to do that. I have a porous pavement driveway at my home, and I have 3 properties that drain into my property, and most of that water goes into my driveway, and it does not leave our property. So a lot of things that can, all of these measures that we're doing on bigger campuses or in urban context can be done in an individual home site.
In fact, whether you have a 16th acre lot, 8th acre lot, you still have, it's really linear. You have custodianship over whatever water rains on you. And whether you're big or small, everybody's drop is important in the bucket.
That's true, because every time they all want that turf grass, short and green, and they're using up drinking water or potable water just to water that lawn when they could use that rainwater to water the lawn.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with a lawn. There are plenty of useful applications for lawns, and but it's just to have lawn everywhere with nothing else is it's problematic.
It's become a default landscape rather than an important landscape.
Yes. We're talking about urban. Let's go on to the agriculture areas, the rural areas there. Living here in Chicago and Cook County, the Midwest, we call ourselves the what do we call ourselves? The breadbasket of the world, because we have one of the largest company here that is called the grocery store to the the grocery store to the super grocery store to the grocery, that supply all the corn, maybe all the soybeans here in the Midwest. What do you think of that statement? That is this an accurate representation, calling us the breadbasket of the world?
Well, it's a rhetorical sort of marketing thing, but at the end of the day, food will have to be grown near where people live. And
will have to be?
Yes.
Okay.
And we can't use it as a commodity, because we're mining away our soil and mining away our water by using it politically or economically to pretend we're feeding the world.
So you mean we're depleting our water supply
and our soil supply
and because we're not providing more nutrient into that soil.
So if we went back to real farming, where we had organic matter, manure, plants, animals, local farms feeding local people, bring urban gardening back, where there's a lot of programs now where people are starting to develop.
Now here's a typical farmland here, farm there, right? And they're growing. I don't know what he's growing. Is it soybean right now or corn? But this is a typical. They're growing one type of crop.
Well, most of the corn, you could drive from here to Des Moines and not see sweet corn.
Not sweet corn?
Most of that corn that you see along the roads is field corn. Yeah. And that field corn is not edible by people. It's only can feed cows.
Or pigs.
For livestock feed.
Or be used to now produce ethanol, which isn't economically viable.
So you were saying that before the farmers, as I mentioned before at the beginning of the show, that they used to maybe grow 3 or 4 or 5 different crops.
Oh, they're more than that. They grow
22 crops.
Many different kind of crops.
But at that time, they didn't have a tractor as a horse or a cow, and so they had to grow feed for that animal. Then they had to grow feed for them to eat on. So they had different crops that they were growing.
Well, and they would feed. They would grow and sell to the local community.
Yes.
But the food was much closer to the fork. So if your farmer was right outside the town, then you maybe are only 4 or 5 miles away or whatever. Right now, our food is produced 2,000 miles from the fork, and at $4 a gallon, we have to get that food to where we eat it.
Okay.
And so we're going to have to, with the energy of what it is, our soil wearing out, our water wearing out, billions of dollars in flood damage, all of this related to water and falling on farmland that's generating some runoff. The best way is to bring. The only way we can deal with it is to bring farming. I mean, real farming, where you're putting where you're keeping your soil healthy, So even if you're tilling it, even with a kind of a tractor, if it's you're putting manure back, and just keeping the farm local, feeding local people, making economy local. So that, I mean, think about it. Everybody who lives around here has to have, around this area, will have to have about 2,000, 2,500 calories a day forever. That's going to require farmers locally to give us this food in a healthy way.
So we have to have a diverse food production.
Right, local.
Local.
And that way you keep track on the health and quality of the food.
Yes.
And right now, because we're getting food from God knows where, it's coming in. If it comes from overseas, we don't even have control over the quality of the food. So we really, the cost of growing food at a commodity scale, remote from where we live, is having health costs. This has externalized. We don't externalize this cost when we think about the subsidies that go to corn and bean, but it's just it starts adding up in a huge way. So really, the long-term economy, the healthiest economy, and the most that produces good jobs for most people is to have local farmers, producing local food.
And this will help our water, soil, and air in our community.
The image of the corn root diagram, I mean, these are annual plants. The problem with the annual row crop agriculture at the commodity scale that it is now is that it's economically and ecologically unsustainable. It is a depleter of resources and requires additional resources to even grow.
Yes.
There's no soil rebuilding going on here. There's only soil loss that's occurring and occurring and occurring, and it just keeps on occurring to the point where we've lost almost all of our topsoil that was built through, several centuries upon centuries of prairie evolution.
And this is why they have to improve the seed, probably. Every time they change the seed, they have to improve the fertilizer they're using, and so
it's a big complex circle.
Yeah.
I mean, the way to look at it, really, and it's a painful thing to say because I came from a family farm as a child, is that Midwestern agriculture for at least the last 40 or 50 years has gotten far away from producing food. And now that the ethanol boom has come in, it's not even doing that, because what foodstuffs do get produced through corn and soybean, generally speaking, is through corn syrups and other things that are added into almost everything that we eat, or to produce feed for livestock. And then, of course, most, particularly cattle, aren't adapted to eating cornmeal in the first place. They're grazing animals. They get sick.
Sure, their stomach was plants, but we brought corn onto them so they could bring them to the market faster. Antibiotics, steroids,
and we consume all of that along with all of the very high fat content foods that are now ingested with corn. As several research and other publications have indicated, we're talking corn stock.
Corn.
Our carbon is all corn carbon in our bodies, and you only have to look at the kind of in fact, it's a scary thought, but according to research studies, we're the first generation in the history of humankind on planet Earth whose children have a shorter life expectancy than their parents.
Is that right?
Because of what we eat.
What we eat, yes. Oh, we are what we eat.
Yep.
There. And so by conversion to grassland, you think that's possible? Do you think it's possible to change?
Because what we'll need to do eventually, this is way out there, perhaps, I hope not, but a lot of that land that's now growing bean and corn should grow tall grass, and eventually elk and bison.
And the water and all living creatures.